morning, Macalester. Tonight we're going to be talking about neutrinos, Nobel Prizes, poetry, and how physicists save the world. It's going to get pretty crazy, so stay tuned. So, since tonight the main story we're going to be covering is about the 2015 Nobel Prize in Physics, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about what exactly the Nobel Prize is, because the term is thrown around a lot, especially around October every year, but it's not super commonly known why there is a Nobel Prize in the first place. So who created this mysterious and extremely selective prize? Well, in the late 1800s, a very successful Swedish businessman named Alfred Nobel left in his will to use his huge fortune from his hundreds of patents, one was including the patent for dynamite, so he was a pretty smart guy, to give recognition and award to those who had done their best to benefit mankind in the fields of physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace, which is where some of the Nobel Prizes come from. So these prizes are announced at the beginning of October each year, and the recipient, or a team of recipients as is more common nowadays, are rewarded 10 million Swedish crowns for their discovery or their work in their field. Now, we don't entirely rely on the fortune of some 100-year-old dead philanthropist, so there's a Nobel Foundation that raises money for the prizes each year, which have apparently been going up over the last couple of decades, so if you're interested, now would be the time to go chasing after that Nobel Prize. Of course, that's stated facetiously. The Nobel Prize isn't really something you try to go out on your own to win, but is something that's given to you as a reward for your heroic everyday actions. You win the Nobel Prize for being you, which is the lovely sentiment we're going to end this segment on. Next, we'll be covering the physicists' work leading up to their Nobel Prize in 2015, so stay tuned. Alright, so now we're jumping into the main topic of tonight's show, which is where we're going to discuss the 2015 Nobel Prize in Physics and explain a little bit about what neutrinos are. So, to hint at their definition a little bit, they are almost nothing at all, because they have almost no mass and they have no electric charge. So they're just little bits of almost nothing. They're nicknamed ghost particles because they're so difficult to detect. And neutrinos are some of the most abundant particles in the universe, and thousands and hundreds of billions pass through us every second of the day without us noticing. The very first neutrinos were first created in the Big Bang, but others are constantly being made throughout radioactive decay processes inside the Earth, by exploding stars, so like supernovas, and then through the nuclear processes that power the sun, so nuclear fusion. Their existence was first theorized in the 1930s, but it wasn't until 1956 that two American physicists found traces of these particles, which they now know come in three flavors, known as tau, electron, and muon particles. So these three types of neutrinos are very important, not so much in their names, but in the fact that we know that three types of them exist. Because we know that there are three types, if neutrinos could somehow switch between these types, simple and elegant physics would state that they must have mass. But how do we go on detecting these ghost particles? As neutrinos pass through and interact with matter, on the very rare occasions that they do, they produce charged particles, and these particles, when traveling through ice, give off light. So that's how they're detected. So we have these giant holes in the ground that basically act as huge neutrino telescopes. This is what the Nobel Prize winners in 2015 were using to detect them. They used advanced neutrino detectors in Japan and Canada, and through their experiments they were able to prove that neutrinos did possess a small mass, and that it was physically possible for them to change flavors, and only one type would be detected by their experiment. So they explained the 1/3 smaller detection rate of neutrinos leaving the sun by proving that neutrinos were oscillating between these three states of neutrinos on their way to Earth. So later we'll talk about how that discovery allowed physicists to save the world at the end of our show, but now back to some music. Alright, so now it's time for the most exciting part of this show, which is where we're going to be sharing some neutrino poetry. Now, this first poem is called Cosmic Gall, and it was made by the poet John Updike, and he wrote this poem before the discovery was announced that neutrinos have mass. So there are some modifications that should be made to this poem by physicists, but I'll go ahead and share this now. Cosmic Gall. Neutrinos, they are very small. They have no charge and have no mass, and do not interact at all. The earth is just a silly ball to them, through which they simply pass, like dust maids down a drafty hall, or photons through a sheet of glass. They snub the most exquisite gas, ignore the most substantial wall, cold shoulder steel and sounding brass, insult the stallion in his stall, and, scorning barriers of class, infiltrate you and me. Like tall and painless guillotines, they fall down through our heads into the grass. At night they enter at Nepal and pierce the lover and his lass from underneath the bed. You call it wonderful, I call it crass. So the second line of this poem, they have no charge and have no mass, obviously needs to be changed now that, yay, neutrinos do have mass. So now I decided, in the spirit of this wonderful discovery, to write my own neutrino poem. And it's a little bit of a love poem, and it doesn't have a title because I forgot to title it, but I'll just share this neutrino love poem. A particle, tiny but not massless, elementary but far from simple. What does a neutrino run from? Perhaps they do not flee, but fly, little tiny spaceships exploring the universe. After all, if you exist since the beginning of time, imagine all you could see. Diving through moons of methane, comets breathing fire, black holes endlessly consuming gas and light, maybe even passing by planet Earth. If I were a neutrino, I'd want to stick around Earth for a while. I'd roll in the mud, or soar into the sky with a firework, or float around with fireflies on a fuzzy summer night. But as neutrinos, we don't get to interact with matter much, so we have to save our chance for something truly spectacular. Some probably picked Saturn for her beautiful ring system, or the body of a real live dinosaur, or the brightest and most beautiful comet in the sky. If I were a neutrino, the choice wouldn't be hard. If I were a neutrino, given only one chance in a million years, I'd interact with you, the rarest and most breathtaking phenomena of them all. Hey, thanks for tuning in tonight, and as promised, we're going to end our show talking about how physicists saved the world. So, before the discovery of neutrinos having mass, there was a bit of a crisis among astronomers known as the solar neutrino problem. And it was a lot bigger than a problem because basically upon its discovery in the late 1960s, it stated that the sun could be dying simply because the theoretical model for the amount of neutrinos that should be passing through Earth from the sun did not match the actual data collected for neutrinos passing through the Earth. The number that we detected passing through Earth was much less than the theoretical model, which meant that the sun could be dying because it wasn't producing as much nuclear fusion in its core as it should be. So if the sun died, all life on Earth would also die, so basically the sun would be slowly leading us to a very icy and unpleasant death as it cooled over time. But thanks to the latest Nobel Prize winners in physics for 2015, we don't have to worry about this conundrum we didn't even know existed because the actual number of neutrinos is matching the theoretical model, but because neutrinos change flavors or types as they're traveling from the sun to the Earth, we just weren't detecting the ones that we were supposed to be looking for. So no worries, we won't be dying an icy death anytime soon. Instead, we'll probably just die a fiery death when our sun expands to a gas giant and then consumes the Earth and probably Mars and then puts out into a little white dwarf. So at least we don't have to worry about an icy death anytime soon. Alright, thanks for tuning in tonight. This has been Astro Chats, and it's been wonderful speaking to you all. Have a good night.